Hi, it's Lori from Coast to Coast Craft Girls coming to you from the West Coast. Today I wanted to share a design that I made. This is a 6x6 card front. I made this for my daughter and her fiance. They just got engaged in Hawaii. Those are their initials. And I wanted to take that 6x6 design and turn it into a 2-page layout for a 12x12 scrapbook that I'm making for our family vacation. So anyway, I want to show you how I took this same design from 6x6 into 12x12. So we're going to start with some 12x12 craft card. And on top of the craft card, the first thing we made is the water. And the water I made with a Crafter's Companion edgeable die of the bubbles. And then I did multiple colors. So we have white, and then we have multiple shades of kind of light blue, that I used some Recollections paper that's a shimmer paper in various shades of blue, and then some dark blue that I put through an embossing folder and put some ink on it to make it look like water. Here's the die that I used. Now, as you can see from this edgeable, it's a 6-inch edgeable, so that works great on a 6-inch card, but on a 12x12, it doesn't work so well. So what I did is I cut 3-inch strips of paper in the various colors, and then I ran the die through once on one end, and then slid it up to the other end, and ran it through again. And then I created 3 strips of each color in this 3-inch wide so that I could cover the 2-page layout, because I'm going to put basically 1.5 strips of each color on each 12-inch page. As I start by laying out the water, I'm going to start with the white, and we're going to lay down the bubbles, or whatever you want to call it, in white, and then we're going to overlay the other colors one on top of the other, going from lightest to darkest, to create the sense of foam coming up onto the sand, where the craft card is the sand, obviously. So we're going to go ahead and layer those up, and you want to overlay them enough so that the colors are each color is showing through, but you're mostly covering the brown of the craft card fairly quickly. I like to lay out all the pieces before I start gluing anything down so that I make sure that I've got it all where I want it before I've committed anything onto the paper. And then, as you can see, because it's a 2-page layout, I actually want the sort of the water to line up in the center so that it looks like it's coming together. It's all one page. So that's why I've got the 2 pages laid out together, and you want to try and get the colors fairly even at that middle joining point. Once you know about where you want everything to go, you can glue them each layer down one at a time, starting with the white, then going to the lightest blue, then the medium blue, and then we'll go to the darker blue. Don't worry about the pieces that are kind of hanging over the edge, because we can trim those off when we get done. I'm also not gluing down the individual bubbles. I'm just gluing the sort of the thicker pieces on the back, because I want to come up underneath those bubbles with some ink, so I want them a little bit loose. And then I'll come back and show you how to glue them later once we've got all of the ink where we want it up underneath those bubbles. On the 6-inch card for the dark blue, I used this embossing folder. Unfortunately, the waves go the wrong direction, so it makes it hard. I even had to do it in 2 pieces on the 6x6 card. For a 12x12, that small of a piece would not work very well, given that I want the waves to go the right direction. So I was looking for a different solution. I don't have a large embossing folder that has waves or anything like it that go the right direction, but what I do have is a stencil. And I found a Crafter's Companion wood grain stencil. It's 11 3/4 by 11 3/4. And even though it's wood grain, I looked at it and I think I'm going to be able to make it look like waves, because essentially what waves are is they're just ripples and, movement in the water. And so I think this should work fine. But it's a stencil, not an embossing folder. I'm going to do that with two different shades of dark blue, one sort of a medium dark and one a dark dark, and then cut it into pieces to piece across and cover up the top part of the craft card. Now, where I'm cutting these, I just want to kind of make a wave pattern on the various shades of blue, and then once I get kind of a bit of a wave pattern in there, I'll make sure that that they're covering up the lighter blue and the craft card all the way across, and then we'll do the same thing with the darker blue above that, so that we kind of have these layers of color going from light to dark. To emboss your cardstock using a stencil, you can use your rubber embossing mat through your Gemini to create that emboss. And to do that, you use your clear cutting plate, your plastic shim, then your purple embossing mat, put your cardstock down, your stencil on top of that, and then your clear cutting plate, and run that through your Gemini. I have a Gemini Pro, so I have the 12-inch wide, which is perfect for these large stencils. Also, you can adjust, since it's smaller pieces of paper, you can kind of adjust the paper to get that right angle or part of the design that you want embossed. And we're going to do that for each of the pieces of the medium dark and the dark blue, and get so that we get kind of a nice wave pattern. Once all the embossing is done, we'll go ahead and glue those pieces down, layering the colors the way that from light to dark to cover up the rest of the craft card above the blue foamy bubble wave. Then I'm going to use a Midnight water reactive ink to kind of give a little bit of color to the darker blue areas, just to break it up so that it doesn't look like one solid color. Because if you think about the ocean, it has kind of light areas and dark areas and different shades. So if we use some water reactive ink in pockets or in pieces, just sort of randomly, it gives it a nice textured look. And then I'm going to use the white to kind of pull from underneath the little bubbles up onto the sand to make it look like as the water is coming up onto the sand, it kind of leaves a little bit of a foamy look. And so this white ink on the craft card coming up from underneath the bubbles kind of softens that harshness of the line between the bubbles and the craft card, and it makes it look a little bit more like water. Use the white pigment ink to give one on the dark blue areas to highlight some of the embossed areas to make it look like wave, the peaks of waves. You know how you have kind of waves breaking and it gives that kind of sense of almost like white caps in the water. So we're going to put a little bit of the white up in the darker blues. On my 6x6 card base, I wrote my daughter and her fiance's initials. But on this one, because it's our family scrapbook, I want to write Ohana, which means family in Hawaiian. And to do that, I'm going to use embossing powder. And what I use is an embossing pen. So it's essentially a pen that you can write with that has embossing ink, just like is on your watermark ink pad. And then I'm going to sprinkle some clear embossing powder on there, heat set that. And then we'll use some brown water reactive ink to kind of highlight the writing, as well as to give dark parts to the sand. So where the water comes up, the sand is darker when it's wet, and so we're going to use that darker brown ink to make it look like there's sort of pieces of wet sand. So we're going to come right up along the white foam that we just put down with the white pigment ink, use that darker brown to kind of pull randomly. Don't, make it a harsh line, but just sort of randomly pull some darker areas onto the craft card as we come up to make it look like wet sand. So these edges are loose, and I did that intentionally because I wanted to be able to get the ink up underneath there. But to get them tightened down, I've just put a little bit of glue on the bottom of or a piece of cardstock, slide it under, and kind of give a little bit of glue on those edges. Just kind of right along the edge. And then push them down. And you probably have to do it a couple times because it needs a little more ink or a little more glue. Next is my title for my scrapbook page, and I've cut the word Hawaii as well as 2024 out of the Crafter's Companion statement alphabet. And the statement alphabet has dies that cut the top layer as well as a stamp that you can use to stamp the sort of an underlying layer. And then I did the stamping with some dark blue ink, and then I put it on my scan and cut where I can scan that image and do an offset so I get a nice white border around each letter. Once that's cut on my scan and cut, then I can come back and put the title and onto my scrapbook page, and then we'll be just about done. And there we go. And that's my two-page layout to start off, to open up my scrapbook for our family trip to Hawaii this year.